Hey, Molly, what's going on?
Hey, I am excited to chat again today, Jason. Good to see you.
I know we're back again. It's been a whole week, and we're back again on Facebook.
We did
And
it once. We did it once, and we came back for more.
we did it once, and the fans said we need more of this. So here we are again.
Right.
Although they might be disappointed. They might be disappointed today because it's not now. They have to hear me talk about something.
Oh, I was going to say, let's not let them know that we planned 4 sessions. Let's let them think that we planned for one, and the demand was so great that we came back for more. Let's not tell them this was the plan all along.
We can make a sales pitch. I would be like, "This is the last free one. After this, there's going to be a link in Zoom. It's we need to talk about our pricing model and the splits and everything. But I think we've got something here. We've got a profitable business model here.
I don't know who wouldn't pay to just listen to us chat.
Just listen to us talk. I mean, who would? Well, let's. I think we should probably introduce ourselves again in case somebody wasn't here last week. So, as our distinguished host for the day, Molly, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. So my name is Molly Grisham. I am a former college soccer coach, educator, and about almost 5 years ago, made a switch, started my own business, really in the space of personal growth and development. So I work with teams and organizations all over the country on things like leadership development and team building and personality assessments, all that stuff that if you do it well, your group tends to move along and has a positive experience. And if you don't do it well, you tend to struggle. And last week I got to talk about Myers-Briggs, which was kind of my go-to assessment. But I'm excited today that we get to hear from you. So before we dive into that, who are you? Who
am I? That is the question. The one thing I have to say, Molly, is whoever your designer, if it was you or whatever, the fact that you have your own logo I'm really jealous. Like I have my own logo, but it doesn't incorporate like a light bulb with your initials. That's pretty cool. And you're wearing swag today too. It's pretty awesome.
I got it. It's everywhere, Jason. It's
Look
everywhere.
I need something like that. I don't have anything like that. I have a bunch of other people's swag, but I need my own swag.
Well, maybe we can find a personality assessment that will help you figure out that path to creating your own logo. I don't know. Maybe that's a possibility.
Definitely through what you're saying is we could accelerate through assessments. Is that what you're saying?
I was trying to say it, but I didn't have the words.
There it is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Molly. So I'm Jason Frizzell. I'm an executive and leadership coach. I work mostly with tech firms and people who work inside of them, a lot of startups. I am also certified in a couple of tools, one which we'll talk about today. And I'm also certified in Gallup Clifton Strengths, which we're going to talk about in week 4. Wait, I'm sorry. No, we haven't planned that yet. That's right. We haven't planned it, but I think that the audience is asking for it. So if we were to do something in 2 weeks, that would probably be what I talk about.
Great. We'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, exactly. So I do coach one-on-one coaching, group coaching. I am going to be running a mastermind, and I have an exciting announcement that I think I'll be able to announce next week on something else I'm going to be up to. So it's pretty exciting, but I'm going to hold off until it's official. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, shall we dive into our theme for the day? Are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Okay, so I was thinking maybe before we deep dive on DiSC, we talked about Myers-Briggs last week, and I'm curious if there were any takeaways that you had from that conversation. Was there anything that was new to you? And I bring that up because I think we're always learning and growing, even for us as people that are certified in some of these tools and use these tools on a regular basis. But I know Myers-Briggs isn't necessarily your go-to. But was there anything that you walked away with like, ooh, I didn't know that, or I want to remember that?
Good coaching question. Yeah, nothing sticks out at me only because I've spent a pretty significant amount of time on it in the last probably like 3 months, as we talked about last week with my style shifting and everything. So there's a lot of takeaways. Were they new for me? Probably not, because I've been coached on it before with you, with other people, and I've read my report. What about you? Is there anything that stood out to you from what we talked about?
It was really helpful for me to talk through the sensing versus intuition, because I always struggle to identify the differences between those two. And when I was talking about that image that I often put up when I'm doing the process of taking people through Myers-Briggs, and how The intuition people assign meaning to it, and the sensing people just see the data points. There's an object there. It was a really good reminder for me because I was working with a coach this week who was very much, I just see the facts. I just see, like she's sensing.
Like a sports coach?
Yes, sensing, no question about it. But there was some tension with her players who were assigning a lot of meaning to things that were happening within their program. And so to be able to stop and think about, oh, there's a disconnect there between this coach and her players in terms of what's the meaning of the thing that just happened, where the coach is saying, there's no meaning. It's just a thing. It just happened. That's it. And the players are creating these stories of meaning and assigning meaning to them. So it was helpful for me to have talked through that with you and kind of have that fresh on my mind as I navigated that situation with those people.
You just reminded me of the big new takeaway was that analogy of the picture. Mm-hmm. That's a game changer for me to be able to describe what those two things. That's such a good way to relate to it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's growth in all of these tools for sure.
In all these tools. Acceleration too.
That's it. We should keep that in mind.
All
right. So we're going to dive into DiSC today. And I know that that's a tool that you use a lot.
Yep.
And we'll probably get into this. Like, I know just enough to be dangerous. So I'm excited to pick your brain today and learn a little bit more. Certainly within the landscape of the college athletic teams that I work with, DiSC is used a lot with the NCAA. Really? I would say the NCAA is a fan of DiSC. Okay. So I'm curious to learn more from you about why that might be the case and how maybe I can utilize it in some of my work. But let's just start with an overview for someone who's like, DiSC, I've never heard of that. Is it DISK? What does this stand for? Can you give us a basic overview before we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. So DiSC as not a philosophy, but as we'll call it a methodology, is actually open source. So I don't know exactly when it was invented, but unlike Myers-Briggs, which is Myers-Briggs owns it, they certify in it. DiSC is actually something that anybody like Molly and Jason, if we wanted to, we could go out and we could take DiSC and we could create a product on top of it. Mm-hmm. So it's an open source philosophy. And this is why you see like Tony Robbins has a free DiSC tool on his website. You see DiSC for sales, you see all these different places. So companies actually build things on top of like the DiSC framework. So I thought it would be useful to perhaps start with what DiSC is. And you asked the first question, which is perfect. Is it DISK? The answer is no, which I know you know. And DiSC is an acronym. So it's and I'm going to go through each of these So the first one is it's an uppercase D. Well, actually, let me back up, Molly. I'm certified specifically in, it's called Everything DiSC. And it's the product from a company called Wiley & Sons, a big publishing company, like 6,000 employees. They have a lot of products. They have created Everything DiSC. So everything I'm going to share with you today is from that product set. So if somebody's listening and they say, hey, well, like I've taken DiSC, but this doesn't sound the same. It's because I only know about how every Wiley does it. And I can talk about why I decided to go to them. So DiSC is an acronym. So the first letter is the D. And that's a capital D in the Wiley framework, and that stands for dominance. And so some of the key traits of somebody high in the dominance. And let me back up again. DiSC and Everything DiSC is a circle. So you can imagine like Myers-Briggs's lines back and forth. DiSC is a circle, which you get mapped to, and you have a dot somewhere living on the circle. So when I talk about D, I'm talking about the upper left quadrant. That stands for dominance. So some of the traits of people who are high in the dominance would be the direct, firm, strong-willed, forceful, and results-oriented. So that's the D, that's the dominance. The second letter is an I, and in Everything DiSC, it's a lowercase I. Why? I don't know. It's a branding thing or what, but it looks cool. I guess it looks cool. And so that stands for influence. And so influence, some of the traits are outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, high-spirited, and lively. The next letter is an S, and that stands for steadiness. So that's even-tempered, accommodating, patient, humble, tactful. And the last letter is not a K, it's a C, and it's an uppercase C. So you have an uppercase D, a lowercase I, an uppercase S, and an uppercase C. The C stands for conscientiousness. And so some of the traits inside of that quadrant are analytical, reserved, precise, private, and systematic.
Okay. So when I think about that image, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like a pizza that's been sliced into 4 pieces.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you say that I land somewhere on that pizza, does everybody land in the same spot, or could I be like near the crust or near the middle or closer to one piece or the other piece, or do I just land in D and that's just it?
No. So the way it works is your dot means something.
Okay.
So for example, Molly, I've seen your report and you are all the way out on the circle as a C, which I want to talk to you about because it's opposite of me.
Okay.
No surprise. And in a good way. And so the dot actually represents how much you identify with that. So if we bring it back to the context of Myers-Briggs, it'd be how much do you pull towards that?
Okay.
It's interesting because usually people land fairly on the crust. We'll call it the crust part of the pizza.
Okay.
I have 2 clients that have done this recently and they're almost in the middle, which I've never seen before. Like they're both in the C quadrant, but they're like barely in the C quadrant. And we'll talk a little bit later about what that actually means. So what you'll get when you take a DiSC report is you'll get mapped to the circle and you'll be at very specific point, either closer to the middle or out to the edge. And that means something. And so it's again, like how strongly you pull towards that, or how to put this in an easy way. It's how easily you get to that spot.
Okay.
And so I'll just say this now. One of the things I always say to my clients, if I'm doing this in group work, is imagine that this pizza, it's flat, because a pizza not flat doesn't work. So I like your analogy. Imagine the pizza how it actually should be. And imagine that your dot is a stick. So your dot, so you're on the C, I'm on the I, you dot it, you take a rubber band and put it on the stick, and then you pull it. That demonstrates the further you are in the circle, the more resistance you get to when you try to move to the other side, or when you're working with people that are on the other side of the DiSC circle. If you're in the middle, you kind of have equal access to everywhere, but you also don't necessarily, you can sometimes be perceived as like a master of none, because you're kind of like, you relate to everybody, but you may not have a pull towards something. You might be a jack of all trades. You might be a master of none. It just depends on a variety of factors, but that's how it works. And that's how the dot specifically works. So that's actually really important when you have a client. If they're like, it's kind of like for Myers-Briggs, if you have somebody's an SN, but they're slightly an N, you can relate to that. Like, well, they've got a lot of S as well. This is kind of the same thing. If you're high I, like I am, conscientiousness is not really how I show up. It's also not something that I enjoy. If I was closer to the middle, it would be easier for me to really access that part of me.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yep.
So let's maybe unpack a little bit more each of those 4 options. I don't know what we would call those. When I think of is it dominant or dominance? Dominance. Okay. So the people that I know that would say that they are a D tend to be extroverts. Do you have to be an extrovert? And maybe what does that dominance look like? How does it show up in the world?
Yeah. You don't have to be an extrovert. Highly likely that you are. Okay. So the other thing I should have mentioned before, the circle also relates to, and I'm just pulling this up on my side. The circle also relates to 2 quadrants. So the circle is built on 2 axes in the middle. Mm-hmm. The quadrant that's vertically on the upside is active, fast-paced, assertive, dynamic, and bold.
Okay.
And the reverse of that is thoughtful, calm, methodical, moderate paced, and careful. So right there, you can already see extroversion, introversion.
Right.
The horizontal axis inside the circle relates to accepting or skepticism. So on the left side, you've got questioning, logic focused, objective, skeptical, and challenging. Okay. And if you take the axis all the way to the right, you have accepting, people focused, empathizing, receptive, and agreeable. So generally, you will see almost all extroverts land in a D or an I.
Okay.
Because that's actually how the scale is written. Because, like any other assessment, it asks you questions like, do you enjoy being with people? Do you enjoy being the center of attention? Do you like discussing your ideas? More likely people than the D or like if you were to answer no to those, you probably wouldn't end up in the D or the I think. Could you be a DI and also be an I on the Myers-Briggs? I think it's possible. I think you would likely be slightly I though. I don't think you'd ever find a high I in the D or I quadrant. Just like I would be shocked if you found a high E in that C or the S quadrant.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating to almost take all of these assessments. It's like a different lens when you go to the eye doctor, when they say like 1 or 2, 3 or 4, which I'm always like, one more time, I want to get this right. But every time I layer on another assessment, it's almost like I see with more depth who someone is and how they navigate the world. So, I know we're going to get to the Enneagram in the future, but I have looked a lot at like statistically, if you fall into this Myers-Briggs category, what are the odds that you're going to fall into this category on the Enneagram? Yeah. And of course there are connections because we're measuring similar things from a different perspective. So it makes sense to me that half of the population might fall towards these two things because they tend to have extroverted characteristics, and half the population would fall into these other two. Okay.
I love that. And we'll talk about this in 2 weeks with Gallup Clifton Strengths. There's, they have a really cool sheet that I think you would love. I think it's really interesting. If you have one of these strengths in your top 10, what's the thing that's most statistically likely to be in your top 10? And what's the thing that's least statistically? And that's cool because if you have a client who's like, oh, my number 4 is maximizer, and then my number 9 is a thing that's statistically the least probably, you're like, well, that's something interesting to really get coaching on, to get curious about, because that's a unicorn.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Very cool.
In my experience with people who would say they are a D in the DiSC world, I would say one of my experiences that's been pretty consistent is they are the ones willing to speak up when no one else is willing. Like they're willing to say the hard thing. They're willing to address the elephant in the room. And what's been interesting to me, particularly as I work with college students, is watching them learn when to put that superhero power into use, when to play that card. Because I think at a young age, it comes across as they want to argue with you about everything. when really it's just like, no, I see something off and I have to say something, like somebody needs to address this. But there's this almost tipping point when they learn when to channel that it becomes magical to watch them latch on to like, this is the issue. This is my time. This is when I need to use my voice. Have you had experience with people who fall into that D category of trying to figure out, when do I put this into practice and when do I dial it back?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a common thing to coach on, actually, because with the D category, the D, and so the other thing I would say is, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I want to go back to this because it actually makes sense at this point. Inside of each of these 4 quadrants for everything DiSC, there's actually 3 styles. So you have a DiSC, you have a D, and you have a DI, and you have an I, an ID, an I, an IS, and around you go. So you actually end up with 12 circles. When you look at somebody who is a DI or an ID, which is a lot of salespeople end up there. Okay. A lot of salespeople end up there because it's like influencing you, results oriented. That style tends to be not so concerned with the how, the what. And I'll speak from my own experience. I'm a high ID. I'm like, you're all the way out to C. I'm all the way out on the end of the circle ID. I don't really care about the details most of the time. What I care about is the vision, what's possible. The how is interesting to me a little bit, but I also, for most people, like, hey, Molly's got the how. She's going to come with the data. She's going to come with the analytics. Like, I don't, like what I want to know is when we're having a conversation is what's the point of all this? Like, where are we going with this? What's this thing going to be? So back to your question about the D, what you'll find sometimes, and this is like core to DiSC, and where DiSC becomes extremely useful is with teams, sports teams, work teams, churches, nonprofits. It doesn't really matter. We got a group of people. One of the blind spots for Ds is that they go to what they know. I want the result and I want to know this. And for somebody who's a high C or high S, that's actually not what they care about so much. Most everybody cares about the results, but they care about like more of the details. So I'm thinking about, I have a client I did some DiSC work with, individual, and he's a high DC, and he actually wants to shift into I because he wants to work on his leadership, and he sees I as more the kind of leader he wants to be. So what he's actually been working on is not necessarily saying the thing and not being the one to problem solve everything, and instead to shift into, hey, Molly, what do you see? Molly, what do you think, Molly? Hey, I noticed the thing here, but before I say what I've seen, what do you see? Like that sort of thing, moving it that way. So I want to relate this to sports for a minute. So this is a good example where if I could relate this to basketball, because I think basketball is probably the best sport because everybody can actually do everything, right? Like, on the pitch, on the soccer pitch, it's unlikely the defender's going to score a goal. Although I did see the Liverpool goalie scored a goal. Did you see that? That was amazing.
Yeah.
Crazy. But in basketball, like hypothetically, any player on the court can at any time play any position, hypothetically. The D would likely be the person who's like, give me the ball. I want the ball. Give me the ball. I'm going to shoot. I'm going to shoot. I'm going to score.
Okay.
And so that's probably in soccer. That's probably your striker. That's probably, the give me the ball when the game's in the line. I want to take that shot.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I've written some notes, but I'm going to circle back to these. I'll have some follow-up, at least some questions that you've prompted in me, but let's move on to I. Help me understand, how do the I people show up in the world?
Yeah. So speaking for a friend / me, your eyes are going to be the people that are most interested in the people, like most interested in people. So dominance you could think of is generally, and again, these are all stereotypical. We addressed this last week, but I'm going to say it now. Just because you're a D doesn't mean you don't care about people or data. It's just the place that you most naturally go. I are people that are like to inspire, that like vision generally, and like to rally people around them.
Okay.
Around them, or rally people for them, and not like in terms of like, inspirational type leader. So the I will generally show up as the person who's open to a lot of ideas, doesn't generally need to know the how, very people focused. So, relating I to, let's just say soccer, this is probably going to be your cheerleader on the team. They don't need to necessarily be the person who does it all, but that they're going to be the person that's going to be ready. The thing about basketball, I think of like an I would be like a point guard, a non-scoring point guard. I don't need to be the guy who's putting it all in the basket. And, like Steph Curry obviously won the scoring title as a point guard. So, but I don't necessarily need to be scoring every point, but that I got your back. I'm going to be able to pass the ball to you. And all, like, what do we need to actually generate these results as a team? So eyes are generally very high on like team focused.
Okay.
Teamwork. The other thing that eyes are generally high in is group work. Okay. Groups. So I'm a huge fan of working with teams, like working inside of a team, working on a team. You and I are a team doing this. Like that is probably the thing that fires me up more than anything else. So one of the things is when you have people that are like, I like to work in teams. I like to do things together. You're likely looking at an I. Okay. I is probably the place where I would be shocked if you found an introvert. Because actually it's the people. A high I is very unlikely to be an introvert, in my opinion. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. So we're moving around the pie here. D-I. Now we've got S next. How does the S's show up in the world? Steadiness. Okay. So S is generally the style that likes to provide support. Stability, collaboration. These are the people in an organization, whether that be on the field or at work, that are generally going to be, they're like, oh, Molly, she's a great team player. She's calm, cool, and collected. She's a great team player. She's patient. So, relating it back to, I guess we'll relate this one to soccer. This is probably like your midfielder. What I would guess is like, hey, I'm in the middle. I might score. I might not. I might have an opportunity, but what I'm more is like keeping the flow going on the field. And for those who are listening who aren't soccer fans, they're like, what? You lost me. But I think most people understand. So these are the folks who in an organization lend an ear. They're going to be ready to assist. They're going to want to make sure that everybody gets along. That's kind of the hallmark of the S style.
Okay. Excellent. And let's talk about me. Let's go to C.
Let's talk about Molly. I mean, we finally get to the thing the fans want. Finally. Molly. Yeah, Molly's a high C. I saw that. Which is actually a great partnership for me because I'm like, y'all work. I even said this to you. I'm like, hey, can you go work out these details? Like, I don't really know. I'll give you an idea and then we'll go from there. But so high C. So you can think of the C's as the tacticians. Like a lot of information. And I think you shared this for you last week and with the Myers-Briggs is you like a lot of information. You're a T, right? So you like to ponder, you like to see the patterns and all those things. So a high C or in an organization, well, actually, let's go to the sports analogy. A high C would be, hey, what play, how is this? We're going to run this play. How is it all going to play out? What is this going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do if this play busts? Right. Like the I is going to be like, yeah, we'll figure it out. We've trained. And the C's are going to be like, well, if it busts, we have these three options and here's how it's going to go on these three. Very important skill set to have. In an organization, C's are generally going to be the folks who are in charge of things like accuracy, challenging assumptions about data, kind of like what I would call like the experts in an organization. So you can think of the C's in terms of roles. This is generally where like your accountant, your finance people, your like operations style people that are really need to make sure that things are running smoothly. And it's all about the data. And so that's a high C. So does that resonate with how you like to operate?
Yeah. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room and someone has said, well, we know this is a fact. And I've been the one that's like, do we know that? They're like, no, we know this is true. And
I'm the one who would say that. Be like, yeah. I'm the one who'd be like, yeah, this is a fact. Can we move on? And you're like, wait a minute.
Like, do we know that's true? And they're like, yeah. I mean, yeah, of course it's true. I'm like, but do we know that's true? And how do we know that's true?
That's great.
But yeah, that totally resonates with me. Of like, I love to unpack things and really get down to like, what's the truth here? What's the reality here? What's real here? And I would say the place it shows up for me the most is as I work with groups and organizations, I want to make sure we're solving the right problem. So for me, it's a lot of, well, we got to figure out the right problem before we get really excited about this solution, because we don't even know if we're solving the right problem yet. And oftentimes leaders will say to me, well, here's the problem. And I'm like, that's how it's showing up as a symptom. But let's actually find out what the real problem is before we go down this road of a solution.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I'm just relating this back to how I would be. I'm like, I don't really care. I'm like a high ID. And I think I probably fluctuate into the D quadrant quite a bit. I'm probably like, I know we got a problem. Just tell me how to fix it. So we can look at what's next. I'm always what's next, what's possible. Not so concerned about, and yes, of course, you're always gonna be looking at problems, but overall, like that is, and I just said this before and I'll say it again, for somebody who's a high I or in the I quadrant, having C's on the team to be a balance, and we'll get into more about how this all ends up working group dynamic. It's so crucial. You got a bunch of I's, it's not going to work. You got a bunch of C's, it's not going to work because you're going to be just
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you would say this is a DiSC thing, like does this show up? So one of the tension points for me at times working with people is when we are brainstorming, we're problem solving, we're trying to figure something out. I tend to be the person that says that's not going to work. That what you just proposed right there is not going to work. And it can suck the air out of the room. It can be that moment there, like, here she goes again. Like, we can't get it right. And it's not that I have all the right answers. In fact, I don't have an answer. I'm just telling you, I've thought through it far enough to know that's not going to work. So cross that off the list and let's circle back and see what we can figure out. But there have been multiple times where I've been in a group or a team, and that's become a real tension point. Like I have to be really careful when someone's excited about their idea to not just shoot it down, even though I know I've done the research, I've looked at it, I've thought it through, it's not going to work. And I feel like I would be doing you a disservice to let you go all the way down that road.
Right.
But I'm curious, does that make sense to you in this C category that we might have that tension point?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. Because I'll speak only for myself. I get very excited about my ideas. And I also don't have an eye on all the details. Sometimes I do. I'm a closeted C sometimes, for sure. But I think it's just like anything else. It's just the way you address that. And also the attachment to the idea. Yeah. Somebody's really attached to an idea. Might like, hey, would you be open to me? Hey, I've done some thinking on this. Would you be open to my findings? Because remember, when you're talking to somebody who's in a high D or high I, we're looking at the result. What's the thing that's going to move us forward? And if you can move something off my plate and convince me, it's probably really valuable. It's probably something I want, because it's going to free me up to look at other things. It's just like anything, though. It's all in the messaging, right? If you're like, the statement when somebody's like, hey, Molly, I have this idea today, and you're like, that's not going to work.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, we come back to this idea that these assessments can help accelerate our growth. That's a perfect example for me, where there was a sense of growth and maturity and awareness, because it would be very easy for me to say in those moments, I know I'm right. And you're going to find out I'm right in 2 months. Like, I'm right. But if I destroy the relationships in that moment, it doesn't matter if I'm right. And so having that sense of awareness with any of these tools accelerates my growth, accelerates relationships, and gets us to that result.
Yeah.
But it requires me to say, like, okay, be aware of yourself in this moment. You choose your words carefully, think about your body language. Like, there's just an awareness that I think comes with any of these tools. It's so critical.
For sure. Yeah. One of the things we haven't covered quite yet, I think we'll cover here in a little bit, that's really fun about DiSC is that it gives you all these traits, but then it also gives you what I call the pro tips. How do you pick up what somebody's DiSC style is? And the way you pick it up is generally through the things that they're afraid of, what they do when they're under pressure, and what their limitations are. Because like the other part of it is a little bit harder to spot. But think of it, for anybody listening here who's been in a work environment, you're pretty clear about how your coworker or your manager operates when they're under stress. And from there, you can say, oh, this is probably this style. Like and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I'm saying this for you because in the C quadrant, I'm just looking down at my chart here, limitations of C, overly critical, tendency to overanalyze, isolate self.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I can, and like the overanalyzing and the isolating go hand in hand, because the more I think I need space to analyze, the more I have to isolate myself, which gives me more space to that can be a rabbit hole that gets really unhealthy really quickly. And so making sure I'm intentional about how much of my energy should I spend thinking about this? Because if you leave it to me, I'll say I need a year to think about it before I make a decision.
Yeah. And one of the other things in the C quadrant, fears, criticism, slipshot methods, being wrong.
Yep.
Just so you know, I'm not picking on you. I will read for you the influence ones. Okay. Limitations, impulsiveness, lack of follow through, disorganization, fears, social rejection, disapproval, loss of influence, being ignored. So what I'm hearing for you, the that's not going to work to me might feel like I'm being ignored.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not going to work then is connected to me being, I fear us being wrong. I want to get this right. So let's just cross that off the list so we can get to the right stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
Nice.
Sure. Okay. A couple of questions came up for me just in that conversation. So one is, can our, I don't know if styles is the right word, but where we land, can that change over time? Can I move from one to the other? If I took this again in 20 years, should I see a lot of change? What does that look like with the DiSC assessment?
The answer overall is yes. So just like any assessment, how you take it will be reflective of the context you take it in.
Yeah.
So for example, if you threw me into an accounting role, which if anybody's listening, don't ever do that. If you put me in front of a bunch of spreadsheets in a cube all by myself all day, you don't want to do that because don't pay me for that job because I would not do it well.
Yeah.
But I knew that was what I had to do. I would move out of my style a little bit into C most likely, because generally DiSC is used as a work tool, as a workplace tool. Yeah. And generally people are going to take assessments in the context of, well, it's a work context. So like, what is the thing that I'm doing now? Am I in sales? Am I in accounting? Am I a public speaker? Am I a leadership coach? Whatever it is. So the answer is yes. And I can speak from personal experience that I first took DiSC in 2010, and I was a high DiSC actually. And I took it again last year, and I've shifted a whole quadrant because when I took it at the time, I was in sales. And so it was all about what was going to get done and what do we need to do, because I worked in enterprise sales. So there's a lot of moving parts. Now I don't really need to know most of the details. Like the work that I do isn't really detail-oriented work. When you're coaching people, it's really about who you are and being with them and influencing them and supporting them. It doesn't really matter what the details are quite so much, nor the result. I mean, the results matter, but they matter more to my client than they do to me because it's their life. So yes, you can certainly shift. You also can take a look at this when you take it. So if you said to me, "Hey, Jason, here's where I landed. I'd actually like to work on being more supportive, or I'd actually like to work on some I skills."
Okay.
Would you ever move into the I quadrant? Probably not, because a lot of the questions are around like how you like to interact with people. That's probably not going to change. But with that being said, if I was your coach, we could certainly work on, well, like what would it look like to practice some of these more I traits? And so, yes, you can definitely shift.
Okay. Another question that came up, and I'll give you some context for this, is how does gender fit into this assessment? And here's what I mean by that. I would guess that a lot of people that are high D might be 8s on the Enneagram. Maybe. I know a few, maybe. And I know that for women to function as an 8 in the world, to be a outspoken, dominant voice, that's hard for them. Stereotypically, we would like them to dial it back, and then yet we would like to elevate typically male voices. And I think we talked about this last week when we were talking about thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
In our country, we tend to say like, well, the women should be the feelers and the men should be the thinkers. And that's not the case. Are there ways that you see gender being layered into this, or stereotypes or patterns that exist?
So, that's an interesting question. And I haven't ever seen any surveys or studies.
Okay.
If I had to just use my intuition.
Yes.
Without having the data, Molly, if I was just to use my N instead of my S, I would say that historically, the D and the I would be considered more alpha male, masculine energy, and the C and the S would be considered more feminine energy. Now that is a very, very, very blanket term.
Okay.
I would guess that the quadrant that is most likely the quadrant, and I'm just going to make this up, if we had like 1,000 men and 1,000 women who all took this, my guess is that the men would outweigh the women in D by 2-1, would be my guess.
Interesting.
My guess is in the S quadrant, and actually, no, let's take this the way. DRC, 2-1 men, IS, 2-to-1 women would be my guess.
Okay.
I'm sure there's some things out there. I've never seen it, but I think it's, like if you read about steadiness, giving support, maintaining stability, patient, generally women are more patient than men. It's just kind of how women are generally built. So I think there's just more of that here. Now, people all over the place. So I don't know, but you inspired me to go take a look and see if there's any studies out there by Wiley, because Wiley has a ton of great, the amount of people that have taken these assessments, there's millions of people that have taken, there's a ton of good data out there about it. I'm actually going to do some research on that and see. I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Okay. Interesting. So I'm curious, what are the ways an individual or an organization would use this tool? Like who should be saying, I think I'm interested in this whole DiSC thing. What would be like the ideal client to utilize DiSC? Yeah,
I'll relate it back to an engagement I did, and I won't obviously say the name for privacy reasons here, but it's a startup in the software space, and at the time we had 43 employees. Okay. And they were scaling quickly, and they were just taking a look at, hey, how do we work more efficiently together? How do we work more effectively together? Because one thing that we know is we are reliable to do the thing that we're automatically going to do most of the time as a human. Right. And so they were running into some issues like people emailing people's bosses when they didn't get back to them on time. Kind of like I'm going to call it petty because it's realistic, but it's, some of the, hey, we've scaled quickly and we don't have a good process for this, or we have people that are used to doing it this way. And so I would say that any organization that is interested in rolling this out company-wide or at a bigger company like department-wide, it's super valuable because what you can do then is you can start to speak the language of DiSC. So if I'm having a big meeting with Molly and we need to talk about this project we're trying to get off the ground, I can review your style ahead of time. Be like, hey, Molly's a high C. She's probably, to get her excited, she's probably going to want to know some additional data that I said I'd have to her. And you can say, oh, Jason's a high I. He's really going to want to know what's next. And one of the cool things about how Wiley has done this is there's a tool called Catalyst, which I think you've seen. When you take DiSC through a practitioner, which you have to take it through a practitioner, just like Myers-Briggs. Okay. As a practitioner, I would put everybody in one organization, they're called. And then we can see each other at any time. I can search for Molly and say, hey, there's Molly. Oh, she's a high C. What else should I know about her to prepare for this meeting? And so it becomes really valuable there. It's also extremely valuable for just teams of people. Yeah. Anywhere from a sports team down to a department of 6. So I've got another client, they're going to do this for their sales team because that's what they want to do. And I actually want to take a minute as part of this question and tell you all of the different DiSC assessments that are available, because it's not just the workplace assessment. What Wiley has done is, I'm pulling these up right now, which is why I'm looking here. What Wiley has done is they've taken this framework and they built a whole bunch of tools on top of it. So it's always going to have the DiSC component, but it's going to break it down by these topics. So I'm just going to give these all to you right now. So you've got Catalyst Workplace, which is this is the standard one. Okay. You've got something called Agile EQ, which is how do you become more agile with working with different styles. It's going to give you a whole bunch of information about your style, other styles. Something called Productive Conflict, which I think is probably right up your alley. I know you do a lot of work in productive conflict and all the having the tough conversations. There is a management profile. So in one of the engagements that I did, everybody at the company took the workplace assessment, and then we had all the managers. If you managed anybody, all the managers also took the management assessment. So it actually gives you your DiSC style, but then it talks about your management style on top of it. So how do you delegate? Okay. How do you inspire? All the things that the managers do. There's this DiSC for sales, which is really cool. And it breaks down your style as a salesperson and then helps you with how do I sell to other styles. So 2 eyes in a room are going to get super excited and probably going to inspire them and hopefully have them buy. An eye and a C in the room, you're going to have a lot of questions for me about how this thing works and what's going to be meaningful to it. So there's that. There's a work of leaders, which is for up and coming leaders. So people that are maybe individual contributors that want to move into management. What are the things that you could be working on? there's a 360, and then finally there's a 360 tool based on the DiSC methodology. And it's actually called 363 because, you got to brand it your own thing. The 363 tool, and it's something that you'd send it out to both the one person and then like any 360 review, peers, direct reports, managers can answer it. And then it's all inside of the context of DiSC. And so so in other words, what Wiley's done is they built a whole lot of different methodologies on top of this really like framework of DiSC, which is cool. So to answer your question, I've got a lot of things at my disposal or at our disposal to say, hey, Molly, you run a company of 500 people. What are your biggest challenges? Oh, it sounds like over here, your sales team could really use the sales information. Sounds like in engineering, they're really having a hard time getting along. You might want to take a look at productive conflict and agile EQ.
So it sounds like there's lots of options. It's not just, here's the box you got to fit in. Here's the mold. Here's the DiSC mold.
That's right.
But I'm curious if, let's say I had a company, I called you, I said, DiSC, I'm all in. Jason, we want to work with you. What might that process look like? You're just giving us a link and we're all getting a report and that's it? Are you coming onto our campus or to our building and walking us through things? Are we doing regular checkups? Like, what would that process look like for you to help a group learn and grow, accelerate with DiSC?
Yep. So I'm going to answer this by giving you what I consider the best practice.
Okay.
And of course, the answer would be we would build something together because everybody, companies won't. But I will give you the best practice of how I think this should go. Okay. So if you said, hey, I want to do this for all 500 employees, I would lay out for you. Everybody should take workplace. It's kind of the base. Okay. You get your style. I would then offer up that for the sales teams should definitely take sales. Ton of value there.
Okay.
I would offer that for managers, probably take the management profile. And then I would offer for any managers that you either want to grow, that positively, or you've got a manager who maybe is not cutting it. 363 tool is awesome because it'll give you, and so the way the 363 tool works, it'll say, oh, here's Molly, how you answered yourself. And then, oh, here's how people laugh. And they put it in a graph. Yeah. And I call it the Michael Scott syndrome. I don't know if you're an Office fan, but it's like the best, like the best boss ever.
Yes.
Usually what you see is bosses have this nice big circle and then their employees have a little bit inside. I have a client that actually was reverse. So his boss and his 4 peers saw him as much more expansive than he saw himself. So that was an interesting coaching conversation. I'm like, wait, what's the gap here? Because your boss is saying you're really good at this thing, and you're saying that you see it as something to work on. So that is probably where I would go with it. Yes to doing, so it's not like you just take it and you're done. It's always a facilitated thing. So the best practice would be for like a larger company, you do it in teams. So you go out, have a session, talk about it. There's all sorts of fun tools you can use to do it. Lots of interesting questions. And then the follow-up should be every quarter. And so, for example, that engagement I did last year, partnered up with the person in HR who's kind of managing this on their side. And a couple of weeks ago, we did like a 1 hour, hey, let's just review this. And I asked a funny question because we were doing it on Zoom. So I used the polling feature and I said, what's your DiSC style? And I said, I'm just going to remind you all, this poll is completely anonymous. The DiSC style was DISC. I have no freaking idea. We had like 4 people out of like 50 who had no freaking idea. They're like, I just forget. Okay, well, reminder, and then just keep the cadence going. Of course, people are going to get back to what they're used to, not expectation that people are going to continually use it. But just like anything else, what is the constant growth and learning? And a reminder that, hey, this information is available to you. What's a practice? Hey, next time you're meeting with your boss, go check out their style again. Just see where they're at. Do that. So that would be an ongoing thing. And then the other best practice is, as you hire new people, have them take the assessment when they come in. Not before they're hired. It's not a hiring tool.
Yep.
Be very clear. Not a hiring tool, but once they're on board.
Yeah. And I appreciate the the idea that it's ongoing, because I think the place that any of these assessments that we're talking about get a bad rap is when it's utilized as a tool to just check a box.
Yeah.
We did it. We did the DiSC assessment. We're done. And yet with any of these assessments that we're talking about, there are layers upon layers upon layers, not just for yourself, but now I start to overlap Jason and Molly, and whoa, what does that look like for our working relationship? And so I just want to encourage people that whatever assessment you choose to utilize, or assessments, to continue that ongoing process, that it's not a one and done. I'm just getting started on that journey of growth and development.
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, because people are like, oh, this sounds amazing, but it sounds really expensive and extensive. Stuff's not that bad. I mean, when you're talking like, I'll just quote it for workplace, it's $72 a person. It's not a big thing. And then, like for people to facilitate, there's an hourly rate, but you're not talking like $1,000 an employee or something. You're talking like less than $100. You give them some good information. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
At that rate. There's something that I was going to say that you asked about, that I'm drawing a blank on. So I'm just going to move on, because
all right,
my attention to detail is lacking right now.
Well, and I think when we talk about like the financial investment, to me as leaders, we owe it to our people to set them up for current and future success. And a tool like this can be a gift to set someone up for future success. And so I think about all the college teams that use DiSC. Holy smokes, I wish when I was 19 or 20, I knew this about myself.
Oh my God,
because
amazing.
It shapes what that career path looks like. It's a transferable skill. And so I think for leaders, obviously budget is always an issue, but do you want to bring somebody in who's just one and done? Or do you want a tool like this where it's ongoing growth, where people then can choose to continue to dive deeper for themselves and set them up for future success? It's so powerful for us to be able to give that to other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Jason, I'll ask you one question,
Yes.
and then we're going to get close to wrapping it up here, because
Cool.
I mean, the people love hearing us talk, I know, but they do have other things they have to do.
They do.
So my question now is there anything I have not asked you about that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think at a high level, I covered it. I just say, if anybody's interested in learning more about this, just hit me up. If you hear this either in the podcast or hit me up on Facebook, just same for you and Molly.
Yeah.
Is have a conversation about it. It's easy to take. And you've taken it. It's pretty fun. It's not,
it was easy.
It's not something that's, you have to sit down. It's not like taking the SAT or the ACT. It's like you spend 30 minutes and answer some questions about who you really are. Yeah. And, no, I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much what I wanted to today.
I think we covered a lot. That's for sure.
Well, I want to ask you, Molly, as a high C, do you feel like we hit the details that you were hoping for?
I mean, I have a page of notes here. So yes.
That's how many notes I have. None.
All right. So my final kind of wrap it up is, give me the details on, if I'm listening right now, I want to work with Jason. I'm all in. I'm doing DiSC. Where do I find you? Do I fill out a form? Do I look in the white pages? How am I going to make this happen? If you could pull out your yellow pages and go to everything DiSC. No, just hit me up on my website, jasonfrizzell.com, or Facebook message me, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the spots. And that's 1 Z and 2 L's.
Thank you, Molly. Correct? 1 Z, 2 L's. Look at the attention to detail. Do you know how many people get that wrong? Even people that know me for years are like, Frizzell, I'm like, Frizzell, F-R-A-Z-E-L-L.
This is why this is working. This is why we've got this all covered. Okay, so last week we talked about Myers-Briggs. This week we talked about DiSC. Up next, I'll be talking about the Enneagram, which I'm super geeking out about the last couple of years. And then in our final session, you're going to hit on Clifton's Strengths, which is one that I'm still learning about, but excited to learn more. So any closing thoughts from you before we wrap this up?
Well, all I want to say is I'm super excited about Enneagram, because I know what mine is. I'm going to send you my report ahead of time, since I had your DiSC report.
Okay.
I know there's some things like wings and some other like, I'm a blank with a blank, and I'm like, I don't really know what that means. It's cool though. So I'm going to send you yours, and I'm super excited to interview you about it. And I think the last thing I'll say is we'll see everybody here back week. Same time.
Same time, same place. We'll do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.